All righty. Thanks, sir. How's everybody doing? Man, it's been 24 months since I've been on stage, RSA and last year, so it was just like, wow, this is incredible to be back on stage, so thank you. So as he said, my name's Tim Sanage. I'm a senior manager, run our security and compliance partner program, and then specifically, we run the ATO on AWS program, as well as the security solutions for government. So we're gonna kind of talk about really what do we do, how do we achieve security and compliance in AWS, and then this new thing or this new marketing term of zero trust, really kind of explain how we've been doing this for quite a while, but also how we can integrate this new paradigm shift as a zero trust concept in AWS. So a little background, I think we had this slide in the last session. I appreciate them promoting our program, but again, we have a goal of really helping our customers and our partners get through regulated, security and compliance activities. We really want to reduce that time and cost, because as it says here, 18 to 24 months, and somebody asked about, have we been able to accelerate? And absolutely, we can actually get somebody through an ATO process in under 90 days now with some of the accelerators and some of the capabilities that we have helped our partners build, as well as some of the advances and some of the services that you heard about in the last presentation. So really the longest pole in the tent is typically the government review process. So TRs that have to review FedRAMP or DoD SRG or some of the others, that really is where the longer pole is that we really can't control. But ultimately the question that was asked earlier, yeah, we can help accelerate this process because we really are focused on how do we build partnerships with our ISVs and our consulting partners and our integrators so that we make sure that we have all the capabilities pre-built, pre-assessed, and defined. And so as you see at the bottom, one of the pieces that we really leveraged to do this was a few years ago, we came up with a process around AWS security automation and orchestration. And as you'll see, that's really kind of a foundation term with what we've gotten to for Zero Trust today. So as I already talked a little bit, our program is comprised of ISVs, so technologies that are purpose-built, for being able to help treat the various controls within the regulated workspace. We also have system integrators. One of the things that's really been a huge uplift is really the MSSP or the MSP market, where they're actually, a lot of customers and partners come to us and say, yeah, I got to get through FedRAMP or I got to get through CJIS, but I don't want to do all that security stuff and I don't want to do that continuous monitoring and so forth. And so that's really where our system integrators or the MSPs have come around and really helped us with that because they can actually do virtual security operations center capabilities. They can do some of that heavy lift around operationalizing and maintaining your ATO over a long term. And then we work with the top 3 PAOs in the system. So everybody familiar with what a third-party audit authority is? So they're really the people that are out there auditing for FedRAMP or for DoD and even in some cases FISMA. And then, like I said, my team is made up of security strategists, and most, if not all of us, came from the internal security and compliance team within AWS, or we came from third-party audit organizations, the DoD, where we ran IA programs and so forth. So we've got a very, very deep bench on my team of people that know this stuff inside and out and have been doing it upwards of 20, 25 years. So we're here to really help and guide and kind of help you through that journey as we introduce you to the various partners and so forth that help us do this. So as a partner, if you're sitting in the room wondering, hey, how do I get involved? I can help do some of this stuff. I can help enable another partner or a customer. That's really the other part of our program is that we're here to pull in partners that are purpose-built around security compliance, really using that DevSecOps models and how do we actually automate and do things so that we can help partners and customers get through this process as quickly as possible. So, part of that is making sure that we identify our key partners and identify our key use cases. Like we've got a couple up here. SentinelOne leveraged a company called Anishan, which is in our program, and they have a purpose-built security stack that they sell on Marketplace. And they were able to get SentinelOne through all of the FedRAMP implementations, build, and capability for going through audit in around 60 days. And so then they were able to get through audit after that and obviously get to market faster for FedRAMP. The other one is another company in our organization called Clear Data. And they really focus on healthcare and HIPAA and high trust and so forth. So again, the same thing. They've got automated stacks. They've got capabilities that can get our partners and our customers through these regulated entities much quicker with a lot less pain than what is traditionally, known in this space. So obviously the benefits is we're reducing time and cost. Really that's the number one thing. How many people have been in the security and compliance space for a while? I mean, do you agree with me 18 to 24 months is really a history pain point? I mean, and so that's really one of the number one blockers that we're trying to reduce. And then we want to make sure that if you've got to do it more than once, automate it. I mean, one of the baselines of everything that we do is we want to leverage automation. And so you saw in the previous slides, leveraging things like the CIS Foundations benchmark that we wrote several years ago. And we continue to iterate that and add different services in that. We continue to add different capabilities, but we also make sure that we, automate them. And then we collaborate with our partners. Like I said, one of the biggest enablements of our program is our partners, or it is the key enablement of our program, is partners are nimble. They're capable of actually building things that can get us to market and help us get things set up so that we can get the efficiencies out of the automation and scale, but we can also make sure that we can maintain it. And that's really where the bottom is, leveraging those system integrators that have really become, empowering for us. Because again, if you're in the business of selling a widget, you don't not necessarily want to have a full security team on staff. So that's where some of these system integrators can basically help you with giving you the support for a virtual security operations center to help you maintain this, so that you're not every year running to that 90-day window of going, oh man, I got to get everything back together the way it used to be when I went through audit last year. The reality is we want you to be continuously secure and continuously capable of maintaining your ATO at any given point. So I already touched a little bit on Zero Trust. How many people have heard the term Zero Trust over the last couple of years? Like I said, the last time I spoke was at RSA about 24 months ago, and that was the buzzword then, was Zero Trust is this new thing. It's a new paradigm shift. It's going to solve all of our woes. And in some degree, yes, it's a security model. It's not a thing. It's not an architecture. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Sure, we do have partners that say, hey, I can do Zero Trust, and they can, because there's elements of building blocks in Zero Trust. But it's all about, how do I treat the various resources? How do I make sure that nothing has unfederated access, both internal and external, in my organization? How do I make sure that I identify every single resource that's available within my AWS account? And so when you start thinking about a Zero Trust, AWS is purpose-built for that. How many people have worked within the AWS console and deployed services in AWS? A few of you? So you'll notice that every time you launch an EC2 instance, or every time you set up a security group, or every time you set up an IAM user, there's a unique identifier that's associated with every single thing that you do in AWS. And so it's purpose-built for that resource identity. It's purpose-built for that idea around Zero Trust, is I want to know what's interacting within my environment at any given point. And I need to be able to have a specific ID so I can say, yes, this EC2 instance is supposed to be inside this VPC, and it's supposed to leverage this security group. So that's that resource identification. And so you want to make sure that now you have a way to authenticate and authorize every single one of those. And so when you really start looking at what are the basic principles of Zero Trust, you go, wow, this is exactly how AWS has been set up from the start. It's just a matter of educating and making sure that we're leveraging the AWS services that are built in to purpose-build a Zero Trust environment, so that you make sure that all data is and compute services are available and identified. Again, we've already had that built into the service, because we know that all of our resources can be identified. Now it's a matter of, how do I create those trust relationships with those services? How do I make sure that I deny access by default, but allow the services that need to be interconnected, that need to be communicated across that network or outside of that network? How do I make sure that they do that securely? And so again, having that encryption capability, having that built-in communication protections that we already have inside of AWS becomes paramount important of, how do I make sure that I build this Zero Trust capability? And then the monitoring. How many people have turned on CloudTrail and VPC flow logs and all that? I mean, you can log anything in AWS. I mean, and that's the greatest power of AWS as an account, especially from a security standpoint, because you've got a heads-up display. I now know everything that's going on in my environment. I can monitor things. I can actually have auto remediations and corrections using things like AWS config rules and using Security Hub and some of our partner solutions that are already integrated. We also want to make sure that we're authenticating everything and that we're using advanced authentication methods, like how many people use MFA on their accounts? Hopefully everybody. You know, how many people are using a third-party, you know, identifier like a Duo or Okta or something like that, integrating your authentication within that. So really, all of these tools are there and available to be purpose-built and be able to help, you know, secure not only the identity, but identify all the resources that are available and that can communicate with each other. And ultimately, the last one here is really that continuous log and monitoring. You know, one of the key factors of our success within the ATO and AWS program and our security solutions for government program is really being able to know that at any given moment, I'm secure and compliant based on my logging and monitoring and the alarms that I leverage through CloudWatch, or the alarms and configuration associations that I have with config, and even some of the partner solutions that can auto-remediate things that say, hey, wait a sec, this has gotten outside of my swim lane, or as we like to call them, guardrails, is we still have to allow the business to operate, but we need to be able to monitor and maintain those swim lanes or those guardrails. So what is really driving this? I mean, we've all seen in the news over the last several years, you know, you think about all the different breaches that have happened, SolarWinds, some of the other pieces and so forth. And historically, we've always really been, let's secure the boundary of our environments. Let's make sure that we're super secure. And obviously, our team is been intimately involved in that when you're doing certifications. You know, historically, certifications or compliance drive security versus the other way around, where if you're secure by default, you're compliant by default. And so that's some of the pieces that we've always educated our customers and our partners on, is let's be secure for secure's sake, and then the result is we're going to be compliant. We're going to be able to meet FedRAMP. We're going to be able to meet DoD SRG. We're going to be able to meet CJIS and so forth. But as I said, we started down this path about 4 or 5 years ago, really building that security automation orchestration. As you can see, this comes right out of the ZeroTrust NIST documentation. Really, that's what this is about, is how do I make sure that I'm leveraging security automation or infrastructure as code? How do I make sure I leverage those DevOps, you know, that continuous integration, that continuous, you know, change management and process, so that I maintain my security capability, because then that's going to help me maintain my compliance reporting and my security posture at a real time. So these are just some key factors to kind of show where we've started with security automation several years ago, and we continue to do. And even if any of you have been around AWS for a while, you may have even remembered I co-authored a white paper called Security by Design back in 2015, and it was really the baseline of this concept of how do we build security into every layer? How do we make sure that there is not some unfederated trust of any resource that we have in our environment? Because face it, you know, if somebody gets inside your account and it's your typical network architecture that is, once you gain access, you have unfederated opportunity to move around laterally or vertically within that environment. Now all of a sudden, you know, the access was the hardest part. Now you have all that capability. So we need to start really focusing on how do we make sure that we secure that inner capabilities. And that's where you hear a lot, especially ZeroTrust is really driving, is that east-west traffic. How do we make sure that we're encrypting that traffic that's internal of our environment? How do we make sure that we're having defined trust relationships of any services that can or cannot communicate with each other in that environment? And so those are kind of the high overviews of where we're at, where we're going, and why we're getting there, really on how we can help drive this zero trust concept. Because how many people have saw the executive order and the presidential executive order for cybersecurity and some of the other things that have come out over the last few months? It's really driving a lot of this, and it was really nice to see that the executive order talked about automation, zero trust, talked about a lot of these concepts of how can we, you know, advance our security posture both in the government and outside the government with customers and partners that are doing work. So as I said, we've got those zero trust building blocks. We've got the partners that have already been doing this. And then it's a matter of just implementing and helping our customers understand conceptually as well as in practice and operationalizing that security best practice. So everybody's probably familiar with risk management framework. Love it, live it, been around forever. You know, and it really is. It's been a, you know, an amazing, you know, capability and opportunity. I grew up in the Air Force, been around government my entire life, been using the risk management framework. But really it's time that, you know, one of the things that we've been doing is we've kind of operationalized that to the cloud. And so we came up with really a 5-step process of really, hey, I know what security posture I need to achieve, or I know what certification posture that I need to be able to meet. And so one of the things, and this is what we built within the security automation orchestration capability, which became the ATO on AWS program, is customers come to us and say, hey, I need to be FedRAMP certified, or I need to be DoD certified. Great. I've already got a predefined set of infrastructure as code so that I can lay that down right in step 1 of resource provisioning. I don't have to sit there and do, I've got to identify my boundary and my various controls. I already know the controls. I already know what needs to be set up. I already know what needs to be built. So I'm going to lay that down, and it's going to save me time, money, and effort. And then I'm going to go straight into a configuration management, because as we all know, the number one nemesis within a certified or a compliant environment is maintaining that certification and compliance through configuration management. So again, our brothers and sisters in the DevOps community, we've embraced them, and we've said, hey, how do we work together to make sure that operationally we're maintaining those changes, and then we're monitoring them. And then ultimately, as you'll see here, compliance and security becomes an output of just good practice within an environment. And then we finally get to that resource optimization. How do we see the benefits of the cloud at a cost reduction basis, as an efficiency basis, as a reduction in time and effort? And so this is really what we've built over the last several years, and this is how we've been able to operationalize the ATO on AWS process of really, we know for a fact that a customer says, hey, I need to go through FedRAMP, or I need to go through CGIS, or I need to go through HITRUST, or I need to go through IRAP in Australia. We've got purpose-built security automations around that as infrastructure code that is also integrated with our partners. So if you've got, you know, an AV vendor like Trend or Semantic, it's built into that. We've got a SIM, you know, Splunk or Kibana, or, you know, whatever the case may be, you know, your Nessus or your Saint, whatever kind of scanners that you need, all that is purpose built in, but leveraging that concept of a zero-trust architecture. How do I make sure that all those systems and services are integrated? There's no explicit trust that's not necessary to be able to do what's needed to operationalize that environment, but it's secure so that we don't have unfederated access to resources and systems and boundaries that are not necessary. We make sure that all of the devices are configured associated with whatever that boundary security target is. So if it's FedRAMP High, if it's DoD IL5, we make sure that all of those parameters are set as infrastructure as code. Because ultimately, if you're like me, you know, I mean, one of the things that really has been an impact on security over the years, and it's not a negative, it's just the reality is we're all human. We've got multiple things going on, and the reasons why a lot of times things and systems fail is because it's a human that has misconfigured something, or they've set something up wrong, or they forgot to, you know, go and replace that any rule in the firewall that they were using for doing a, you know, some kind of network diagnostic, and said, oh, I got to go get a beer, and I'm going to leave that open. So one of the key factors of why we leverage automation is because we want to let code, we want to let the system and the service maintain at that highest bar so that we maintain that zero trust. So ultimately, this is where we've really built this resource provisioning, making sure that there's an explicit deny all trust factor, and that we're leveraging everything on this concept of least privilege. One of the things over the years, and you probably, if you've been to an AWS or an Amazon presentation, you probably have heard this concept of, you know, security at Amazon is job zero. You know, it's ultimately, it has to be. You know, we're entrusted with so much about our customers and our resources and our partners, and we want to build security into everything that we do. And so we want to impart that through our partners and customers and ensure that we maintain that zero trust capability. So conceptually, here's really, what it would look like as an interaction as far as how do you make sure that you're leveraging the right tools and services within your infrastructure as code or within a zero-trust architecture. And as you can see, one of the key factors here is making sure that all your resources have the proper authorization and identification. How many people have heard of our STS roles within AWS? So one of the key rules in a zero-trust architecture or in any kind of security automation or orchestration or the way we approach it is no human or no service has elevated privileges. They all leverage, a pseudo or being able to assume a role within the environment. And then we time that out. We make sure that it's not pervasive across that organization. So it's like, okay, you're an administrator. You need to log in. You need to do some administrative function. There's a process to elevate that capability, execute whatever that is, and then log out and get out of it. Or if you forget to log out, that's the greatest thing about STS roles. It will log you out. And you can set time limits on that and so forth. And the same thing for service roles and different interactions. You don't want to have anything in your system that has an elevated privilege on an ongoing basis. And so that's one of the key factors as we design the different infrastructure as code and the automations that we deploy. Now, I mentioned this before as configuration management. We have some incredibly powerful tools within AWS that help with configuration management. How many people have heard of AWS Config? Coolest service in the world. I mean, because, you can simply by turning it on and setting up, your logging and monitoring of those resources and service, you can now have a complete heads-up display of this EC2 system, especially if you use tagging, because that's another thing that we do a lot of is we tag resources and say, this is a production EC2 instance, this is a production VPC, and we make sure that we leverage those taggings, and then we leverage config rules and say, hey, this EC2 can only operationalize inside this VPC that is for production, and I have a constant monitoring and tagging that can basically tell me that these are the resources that I care about. They have to be at the ultimate security level, and they have to be maintained there. And if I have something that varies from those various rule sets that I set up using config rules, as the previous person also showed you, we can kill that, or we can auto-remediate that. Like if somebody stands up an EBS volume and it's not encrypted, and that's a requirement of my security and compliance posture, I can either auto-encrypt it, or I can just kill it and get it out of there and notify whoever the resource, that stood it up, hey, by the way, you violated a policy. We need to make sure that all of these things are encrypted before they get deployed in the environment. So it's a pretty powerful tool to be able to interconnect and maintain that configuration management. The other one is AWS Systems Manager. How many people have used AWS Systems Manager? So very powerful for maintaining your patch management, your overall, heads-up display of different resources. But the greatest thing, and this is another thing and a point that we really want to drive home to our customers and our partners, we care about your entire IT service capability, because not always is everybody operating 100% in AWS. And so we make tools and services that extend outside of AWS. And so you can leverage System Manager agents in an external, whether it's another cloud provider, on-premise, whatever your extended boundary is, especially from a security certification boundary standpoint. If you're getting DNS from another cloud provider or you're leveraging Active Directory from someplace else, you want to make sure that that entire boundary maintains that exact same security posture. And so, again, another very powerful tool that not only helps you inside your AWS account, it helps you across your various boundaries, because we know that a lot of organizations either have a secure boundary that is not 100% built in AWS, and we want to make sure that you maintain that security bar across all of those environments. So I've already mentioned a little bit about monitoring and performance. Everybody's familiar with CloudTrail, VPC flow logs. Like I said, ad nauseum, you can log an activity that's going on within AWS. But you can also set up alarms using CloudTrail and CloudWatch, and again, config rules, and even Security Hub. There's a multitude of capabilities that you can then monitor individual services or multiple services across. And then you can also integrate those with partner solutions like a Splunk or a Kibana or whatever, logging SIM tool that is of your preference, you can either maintain your capabilities or your SIM within your AWS account, or you can leverage, some of our SIM products or partners actually have their own FedRAMP hosted environment, so you can actually leverage a cloud-to-cloud SIM capability or an on-prem to cloud capability. But the importance is you want to be able to have this performance monitoring. You want to be able to log and monitor and then react. The biggest negative historically has been for logging is that we've logged ad nauseum. I can remember as a young, security professional in the Air Force of just looking at logs, firewall logs, and all of these, crazy different logs, and it's like, okay, I'm looking at them, I don't know what they mean, and I don't know what you want me to do when I see something. That's the problem that historically we've always logged and monitored, but we didn't have a reaction. We're now at that state of the game that we have to have auto-remediation, auto-reactions. We've got to set thresholds of what is appropriate and not appropriate within our environment, because again, going back to that guardrails, security is an enablement for business. We're here to enable business to be successful, but we also need to create parameters around that success. And so monitoring and performance gives us that opportunity to say, yeah, you're doing some great things and you're being innovative, but you can't go past this guardrail because I saw something that was going on here and we need to correct the capability. And so that's what this really does for us. It really gives us that insight to be able to authorize and maintain those various different workloads, but maintain them on an ongoing basis. Have you heard the concept of continuous ATO or continuous compliance? That's the goal, is we don't want to be compliant and secure at a point in time. We want to be compliant and secure continuously. And so that's, again, why we make sure that we leverage these concepts of like zero trust or security automation and orchestration, because it's going to eliminate some of these security vulnerabilities that we've been seeing as recent. As I said, one of the biggest ones has been that internal east-west traffic, that lateral movement of information that's going from either secure to non-secure, or there's a communication that is being communicated across services, whether it's inbound or out of boundary, that historically has been a trusted communication thread. But we can no longer trust those communication threads. We need to limit that travel between those elements, but we also need to make sure that we're encrypting it, even if it's inside the boundary. We also need to be able to reduce the overall system exposures. One of the things that the greatest part about cloud is that everything is an endpoint. But the other thing that can be bad for some organizations is everything is an endpoint. We no longer have that funnel capability, like everything goes through the firewall, or everything goes through the blue code, or everything goes through these various, scope services. You now can have EC2 instances or VPCs or RDS, entities that have direct paths to a communication, and they have a direct, traffic pattern. And so you've got to be able to make sure that you're reducing those system capabilities, but not impacting the business efficiency, because the reasons why everything has an endpoint is because we want to make business innovative. We want to make sure that we're being able to do more with less and having that best customer experience. But you need to make sure that you identify where are the resources that you can reduce some of that exposure, and then make sure that it's, that it's secure. The same thing is with the unnecessary data pathways. What are the ways that we identify our single source of data and make sure that that's maintained and make sure that it's secure at any moment and time, and it stays that way. It stays as a single operational capability of our environment. And then the last one is really, how do we look at various architectures? One of the biggest things that we've struggled with, or not really struggled with, but one of the reasons why we can't just put out a complete set of this is your security architecture, do it, is that every organization has different driving needs. They have different applications, they have different services. Sometimes they have legacy services that they need to be able to still run and maintain, but we know that they can be inherently insecure. So we've got to look at security architectures that can be dynamic based on our customer and our partner, driving forces around what are they trying to do in business that needs to be secure. So we've got to look at different architecture capabilities and opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, the greatest thing, how many people are security and compliance professionals? Been doing this a while. All of us know that we've all had those situations where it's, Thursday, Friday, somebody says, hey, we're getting ready to launch product X on Monday, and I need you to do a security review, and that's the first time you've ever heard of it. You're like, are you kidding me? You know, this is the greatest part about this paradigm shift, is building security by design in everything that you do, and leveraging security automation and pre-packaging what my end state needs to look like. Security and compliance now becomes an output. I'm a receiver of all the great work that everything has been already done and laid down in this environment. And now I've got really capabilities to be able to give me a heads-up display of what's going on in my environment. How am I maintaining that security and compliance posture? You know, I've got different services within AWS, like Security Hub, that can not only give me direct interactions of things that are going on with AWS services, like config rules, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and so forth. I can integrate partner solutions in there, and they can tell me, hey, we saw an alert here, or we saw a misconfiguration there, or we did an auto-remediation. I can also see that it's like, yes, I did have an exposure, but I limit it to nanoseconds because I had auto-remediation set within my environment. And so I can continue to do things around continuous audit. So how many people have heard of AWS Audit Manager? So we worked with that team last year to really build out what we see as the baseline, or what we see as the beginnings of being a continuous audit and monitoring capability by leveraging Audit Manager and creating defined policies, and then working with our partners to advance those policies and say, hey, what's really important in, you know, a FedRAMP, you know, environment, or in a HIPAA environment? What are the checks? What are the things that we need to make sure that we have? And so those are all integrated, both from an AWS standpoint and our partner community. So really powerful stuff to be able to maintain that security and compliance partnership and capability at any given moment or time. So really the ultimate goal here is really, how do we improve the workforce mobility? How many people were working remote over the last year and a half? Probably all of us, right? So when you start thinking about it, you know, one of the things that was a challenge at the beginning of COVID was, how do we put all these, you know, personnel in a remote workforce capability and still give them the same access to applications, data, the same user experience, and so forth? How do we make sure and do that? Because face it, in a lot of cases, some of these staff, some of these personnel, they don't have a company or a government-issued laptop, or, you know, they're using shared resources at work as it is. So now all of a sudden, we have to give them a resource experience, but possibly leveraging their own devices. So an iPad, or their kid's gaming machine, or their iPhone, whatever the case may be. But we need to make sure that it still delivers a secure and appropriate experience for them, because the last thing that we want to do is give unfederated access off of machines or devices that are untrusted. So that's another paradigm shift, that we have to make sure that we enable that access to applications in any device, no matter whether it's owned or operated by the organization, because ultimately that's the world that we live in now. You know, the person that works at DOT or works at, you know, at a various, you know, shared resource job that got turned into a remote worker, you know, there just isn't that device capability. So that's the other piece that was really a big paradigm shift for us last year, of how do we, you know, set up secure workspaces, set up secure Connect, set up secure AppStream, and give that same delivery and that capability to, you know, those personnel. So, because we're still talking about internal applications that have security wrapping around them, they have access controls around them, they have sensitive data that can't be, you know, manipulated and can't be lost. And so we want to be able to maintain, and in some cases improve, that security posture, but give that same experience to that remote worker. And so that was one of the other challenges that we went through last year, of really, how do we leverage these things, these concepts like zero trust or security automation and orchestration, and then how do we make sure that all scenarios, that those services are secure and that they're maintained that way. And so that was really one of the things that we worked on, making sure that we're leveraging, you know, the different various services within AWS, being able to serve up that application and user experience, but not forego any kind of security or compliance activity. And so, you know, leveraging things like AWS Shield and AWS WAF and various partner solutions, And then making sure, again, treating all of these resources, because really at the end of the day, the human on the end is the resource that we care about. So we care about how do we make sure that we identify and authorize that human to have that access to that application at the time frame with the experience that they expect, but not impact their productivity. And so, this was really one of the key factors that we started with is how do we look at the way to identify them? How do we make sure that we validate that they really are who they say they are, that communication thread is encrypted. It's encrypted at the right level, because in some cases, we had workloads that have to operate at a FIPS 140 validated, cipher level or various security levels based on, government or different types of sensitive workloads. So we've got to make sure that all of that's maintained before we give that application. But again, we're talking nanoseconds for that experience. And so it ultimately finally gets authorized inside that private subnet and is giving that same application experience, that the customer, or in this case, our employees that are set up to do remote work. And so this was another piece that we really had to make sure that we built into the way we do ATOs now, because, this is the new world that we're living in. We're having to serve up information that has sensitive data in it, and we need to be able to have that friction-free access for those applications. And so ultimately, this is where we kind of got into that, ultimate AWS or the cloud promised land is how many people have really been able to optimize their resources within AWS over the years, especially if you're in a secure and compliant environment. Not a lot, and I agree. What we ran into, and this is really why we started our partner program as well as our ATO on AWS program, is we had so many customers coming to us going, I don't know how to secure this thing for that compliance framework. I don't know how to do this architecture for what my widget is supposed to do. We've had customers that were spending so much time trying to identify how do I configure, an EC2, or how do I use serverless, or how do I use Lambda functions to be able to get myself through FedRAMP or DoD or HIPAA or what have you, that they're missing out on all of this resource optimization, all the things that they can really help scale up and scale down their business capability. And so that's the other piece, that the output of this process that we've actually been driving around security automation and orchestration and how to maintain and achieve an ATO on AWS is that we're getting you to this resource optimization level. We're giving you that capability to say, hey, you no longer have to stand up 15 servers based on what you think your perceived need's going to be 6 months from now. You stand up and configure 2 of them, and as you have an increase in drive or need, you auto-scale those exact same secure servers up just in time to do whatever you need to do, and then you auto-scale them back down. But guess what? You're maintaining that exact same security and compliance posture throughout. And so that's really what the goal is to make sure that you start getting efficiencies while you stay secure throughout your journey, whether it's a ZeroTrust architecture, it's a certified or compliant architecture, or it's just a secure workload on AWS. We want to make sure that you're able to maintain but also gain efficiencies of your resources and capability. And the other thing that's it's been a long-standing service in AWS, it's called Trusted Advisor. And so this is then, again, it's a service that's built into your AWS customer account that just tells you, where can I get some cost optimizations? Where can I get some efficiencies? Where am I missing out on possibly some disaster recovery or COOP capabilities within my environment? And so these are, again, all services that are built into your account that we've helped tune within the way that we automate and configure our security approaches. So, this is ultimately where we're trying to get all of our partners and customers. As I said, you saw some of the use cases that we've been able to successfully get various customers and partners through FedRAMP or HITRUST or IRAP in Australia, or even in GDPR and so forth. And so, but also get to this ultimate piece. So before I open it up for questions, here's a few resources, and I know the slides will be available. So, but the key things is there's a lot of resources that we have out there to get you started. Ultimately at the top is our AWS Cloud Security. There's various resources, there's various white papers, both new and old. Like I said, there's even some white papers that I wrote when I was on the internal security and compliance team that are still up there. We've got our FedRAMP compliance on AWS site. gives you all the information and capabilities to pull down our FedRAMP package, pull down our customer responsibility matrix, how to get into Artifact, the program that we run, ATO on AWS, whether you're a customer or partner that needs support from our services, or you're a partner that's sitting in the room right now and says, hey, I think I can help with the ATO on AWS program. It'll tell you how to sign up and become one of our partners and how you can help us, continue to evolve. I mentioned the security solutions for government workloads, so this was really a focus. It kind of came out of the COVID response, and so we have an end user secure benchmark that we co-authored with CIS around how do you secure workspaces, how do you secure AppStream, how do you secure Connect, is one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, making sure that, there's clean, deliberate security configurations that need to be in place, as well as security partners that you need to integrate into your deployment if you're deploying, secure workspaces or AppStream and so forth. The ZeroTrust on AWS site, the AWS Partner Network. So if you're not familiar with the Partner Network, it gives you some information on how to sign up and become a partner. And then the last one, we're working with our internal security and compliance team on some compliance configuration guides, and this is really service by service. You can go through and say, okay, what are the key things that I need to configure inside of XYZ service, and they're step-by-step, like leading practices, best practices, gives you some abilities to be able to map those back to config rules, either existing config rules that say, hey, are my EBS volumes encrypted? And how do I make sure that I set those up properly? How do I leverage automation? And then how do I go back and check those against the compliance guide? So this is an ongoing effort, but this information's out there for you to read. So again, thank you for your time today. My name is Tim Sandage. The best way to get a hold of me is, yes, you can email me at sandagt@Amazon, but the ATO alias is the easiest way because it comes to my entire team, and we can respond to any of your requests and so forth. If you need help or have questions about our programs, please feel free to reach out. And then, and as always, please complete your surveys, because we always want to make sure that we're hitting the mark. We want to make sure that we're giving you the information that you need at the time you need it. So please fill out those surveys. With that, I think I'm doing all right. I got about 7 minutes for questions. So, there's any questions in the audience, and nobody heckled me. Half my team's here and they didn't heckle me, so. Yeah, there's a microphone set up if you can come up here, and we can get your questions.
Thank you. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
We talk about, earning your trust, or throughout your session, what is, to the user, what do they have to do? Do they get periodically, like as simple as a login screen that comes up, to earn their trust throughout their session, or?
Well, and it's a great point. I mean, one of the key pieces is obviously, the initial authorization identification, is really, your typical login and passwords, but we also, one of the key factors that we always talk about and we always make sure that we implement is using MFA or having, the two-factor authentication. But then, again, going back to that authorization, that initial authorization should be login, password, and MFA, but it gives you the most basic access into the environment. And therefore, you're running a least privilege capability, so they don't have a lot of ability to change the environment. But when they are ready and they need to change the environment, they're in a rule internal of the account that says, hey, you can assume this role to issue an encryption key, but you're not capable of deleting an encryption key. And so it gives them, you've got to set up all those specialized rules for that assumption to do change in the environment. And so that's where the continuous checks and balances are. And then, like I said, using an SDS token, it times out by default, and you can even reduce those time factors to say, hey, I want it to time out after 5 minutes of inactivity. And then that way you're making sure that you're maintaining that least privilege security bar and access in that environment.
Okay, thank you.
So one question I have is regarding recent guidelines that FedRAMP PMO has released in terms of how to approach authorization boundary and many other things. Did you get a chance to look at that? Because I'm wondering what's there that I was not aware before. It could be a trapping hazard.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the personnel on my team has been doing the the review of that boundary. I personally have not had a chance to look at it, but back to your point, one of the key factors that has happened in the evolution of FedRAMP is historically we've had 3PAOs or we've had advisors that have basically, they may be building in an environment inside of AWS, but they're leveraging, like Active Directory in Azure, or they're leveraging DNS in Google, or the boundaries are extending, or they're even maybe doing something that's back on-prem. So what they're really trying to do is make sure that they tighten and rationalize the boundaries, and it's really the goal is, again, back to that zero trust, how do I shrink that boundary to a defined scope, and it's historically, I mean, it's funny, it's something that we used to do back in the day in the Air Force, was like, what's your architecture boundary of like the acreage of the base, or what extends beyond, and that's the other side, is that now we have remote workers and everything else. We've got to define what is boundary and what is not boundary, and then what are the authorized resources that can come in or exit that boundary. And so it has a lot to do with, the presidential EO, and it has a lot to do with some of the breaches that we've seen in the past of how do we make sure that we really shrink that boundary and then make sure that it's critically secure with a zero trust concept.
All right. And then is your team part of the ProServe team, or how do we engage?
No, we're not part of the ProServe team. We're in the partner network, so that's why, again, we're, everything is partner driven. And so therefore, even though we have the skill sets and the capabilities, because of the shared responsibility model, my team doesn't do any hands-on. It does advisory work, and then when it comes time for hands-on, then that's where we pull in a partner.
I got
and
it.
say,
So basically just work the account manager if I need to get in touch with you or your team.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
All right.
Do you guys have any documentation for somebody trying to create reciprocity between the different domains? So I'm going to build out the same environment in unclass, secret, TS, but I want it, and the tools are desperate between the three, so.
Yeah, there's not a documented reciprocity. I mean, it's a case-by-case basis. I think it's something that we, it's an opportunity to work on it, but it's something that we would have to be doing with the FedRAMP PMO and DISA and some of the other, entities to make sure we say, okay, can I go high side, low side with, with different tools, or, how do I make sure that I restrict the communication paths? But there's not today there isn't a document that says these are services, even from GovCloud to east-west. Sometimes there's some interconnections that we've got to be super careful with. Back to the previous, question around boundary is how do we tighten these boundaries up, and then how do we authorize the different communication threads?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
When you have a situation, say someone deploys something from some kind of infrastructure as code solution, and it results in a finding and then an auto-remediation, like you're striking a security group rule or something. Can you talk about so you've auto-remediated, but then your baseline is inconsistent with your infrastructure as code baseline. Can you talk about closing that loop a little bit?
Yeah, so the other service that we have in AWS, and if you are doing infrastructure as code, is making sure that you're also, building that into Service Catalog as a product or a portfolio. And so to your point is maybe that, it's just like building a house, when I design the initial blueprint for the house and I find out that I made the toilet too small, my first iteration of my blueprint is not correct, and so I have to change that. And so that's where Service Catalog really helps you do that iterative change, and then maintains that net new, hey, this now infrastructure as code has been changed based on the original. And so you can, and then you also make sure that you pull from whatever code repository that you're using, whether it's using like a GitHub or you're using, our code repositories. You should be treating all of your infrastructure as code as just exactly that. It's dynamic code, so it should fall into your service delivery or software defined delivery process or life cycle. So you've got to make sure that, yeah, maybe I made a mistake on the original infrastructure as code, but it's going to iterate and change, and I've got services that can interact with that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about the templates that you have for the CI/CD pipeline ready templates for resource provisioning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something available to us, or is this something specifically through partners and ProServe only?
But it's both. I mean, there's various infrastructure as code that have been built over the years. You know, I mean, even I helped write the original NIST Quick Start. We're doing a refresh of that. There's the DoD, you know, SRG Quick Start. There's the CGIS Quick Start. There's also AWS Labs, if you've heard of that. It's a GitHub repository that's open source. There's a lot of, you know, but it's also that's a community GitHub, so it's not all 100% AWS personnel that are contributing to that. So there's a lot of infrastructure as code and various templates out there. Even when we first launched the CIS Foundation benchmark, you know, there was a CloudFormation template that was built and set up, as well as a config rules, reactionary checks off of that. And I know over the years that they've built some Lambda functions that are out there on that. I mean, obviously, if you go out to AWS Labs, it goes like to anything you're pulling off the internet. Make sure that you validate that it's appropriate and that you're, you know, that you're doing your own kind of due diligence on what the code is there. But there's various pieces out there. And then, yeah, your last point, a lot of what our partners are doing, you know, like Onision's, ClearData, Cloudticity, you know, all of the partners that are in our program, they've built purpose-built infrastructure as code, and again, it's their proprietary deployment of the stuff that we've worked on together. But in a lot of cases, if you're working with those partners, they'll share that content with you, and it's available as you're working with our different partners.
Thank you.
All right. Yanking me off stage. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.